War is hell. It reaches every hand, from the soldier in the trench to the nurse at his side, from the engineer forging weapons to the families left behind. These are their stories. This is World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. Today's episode, In the Valley of Silence. The pop of the cork echoed through the hall, and he laughed as the contents sprayed outwards towards the guests. His newly acquired uniform was neatly pressed, the epaulets gleaming under the newly installed electric lights. Many were volunteering for the German army, but not many were barons such as Wilhelm von Breidenbach. Fewer still had fathers like his, men of influence who could secure their 19-year-old sons the rank of captain. Tomorrow he would be going to Belgium to fight for the Kaiser. But this was not a going-away party. It was an engagement party. 2 days earlier, Wilhelm had gotten down on one knee and asked his longtime sweetheart, Elisabeth von Falkenberg, to be his bride. He handed the bottle to a nearby servant who instinctively started to pour glasses for the many guests in attendance. Searching somewhat frantically around the room, he found his target, the one man that he needed to speak to. A friend of his father, the Count, Colonel Werner. He made his way over, avoiding the many attempted interactions of his guests. Colonel Werner was a short, stout man with a prominent mustache, his right eye framed by a monocle that hung from a thin gold chain. In the morning, when Wilhelm boarded the train for Belgium, it would be under the colonel's command. And yet, even here, at his own engagement party, the colonel had no idea who he was. That would not do. He needed to change that now, before Werner had more important matters to occupy his time. He had almost reached the colonel when he was grabbed by his sleeve and spun around. There he was, face to face with the woman he wished to spend the rest of his life with, Elizabeth. She was a baroness in a wealthy family that lived just across the Rhine Valley. They had known each other since childhood, and together they had been known as the most beautiful kids in the valley. They were destined. The Grand Duchy of Baden, in this stretch of the Rhine Valley, was home to 2 great vineyards. Both had been established generations earlier by relatives long gone, names that neither Wilhelm nor Elizabeth would ever come to know. Each estate remained under the care of its respective family, yet there was no rivalry between them. Instead, they chose cooperation, and together their vineyards flourished. The Breidenbachs and Falkenbergs had a long history of cooperation, but they had never had family members join in matrimony, and thanks to Wilhelm and Elizabeth, that was slated to change. As always, he was taken with her reddish blonde hair and her striking hazel eyes. She was breathtaking. "Elizabeth, what are you doing?" he asked. "I was going to ask the same of you. It's our engagement party, and you haven't spent any time with me, Wilhelm Breidenbach." He smiled as he glanced around the room at the people who had turned to look at them. He loved how his name sounded in a crowded room. "I know, I'm sorry," he said, straightening his uniform as if that small gesture excused him. He pointed across the room. "Do you see that man over there?" "The fat fellow?" she asked. He chuckled. "Yes, the fat fellow. That's Colonel Werner. I need to speak to him." "Why do you need to speak to him?" "Because starting tomorrow, he will be the man who will lead me to glory on the battlefield. I need to make sure that I'm in his good graces," he explained. "Well, he is here. I'm sure you already are." "Yes, he is here, but he has never met me, and he came after the announcement my father made. After tomorrow, I may just be another face in the crowd to him." "Well then, you better get to him. I wish to marry a colonel myself," she said. "And he can make that happen, my dear." He took her gloved hand and kissed it. Then he turned again towards the colonel. He reached the colonel just as the man was accepting another glass of champagne. "Colonel Werner, Wilhelm said, offering a crisp salute. It's an honor to meet you, sir. The colonel turned, studying him through the monocle. And you are? Captain Wilhelm von Breidenbach, sir. This is my engagement party. My father, Count Albrecht von Breidenbach, spoke of you often. I will be under your command tomorrow, sir. Captain, you say? You look all of 17, lad. How did you manage the rank of captain? Most men would be embarrassed by the circumstances of how he acquired his rank, but Wilhelm was not one of those men. My father, sir, he said proudly. He's an old university chum of General von Bessler. The general was kind enough to see my potential and make the proper arrangements. The colonel smiled faintly, the kind of smile that revealed nothing. I see. Well, the general must have an eye for potential indeed. Wilhelm straightened his tunic, mistaking sarcasm for praise. I intend to prove him right, sir. Ah, yes, Werner said, his expression unchanged. Another young officer eager for the front. Wilhelm smiled. Eager, yes, sir, but not reckless. I intend to serve you well, to be someone you can rely on when the time comes. My men will follow your orders as if they were my own. The colonel gave a short nod. A good attitude. Let's hope it remains so once the shells start falling. Wilhelm's smile never faltered. They will, sir. I've no intention of disappointing you. My family's name has always stood for discipline and honor. You will find that true on the battlefield as well. The colonel's brow lifted slightly. I was under the impression your family's name stood for wine. The remark caught him off guard. He could not tell if it was a gentle jibe or an outright insult, but he chose to believe the former. Well, we do like to keep our fellow Germans in their cups, sir. The colonel laughed loud enough that people looked. This was great, Wilhelm thought to himself. You're a good lad, the colonel finally said. You will share a car with me on the train. It's a private one, just you and I. We can talk tactics. It would be pleasure, sir. This meeting was going better than even Wilhelm expected. Maybe I'll have my father stock your car with wine. That would be ideal, young Wilhelm, very ideal. The colonel glanced across the room. Now, if you will excuse me, young man, I see a woman that needs my attention most hastily. He scurried away before Wilhelm could respond. Elizabeth joined him. Well, how did it go? Did he make you a colonel yet? He smiled at her. It went well. He invited me to share a rail car with him tomorrow. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes glowing in the electric light. I think we should dance. He thought so too. The train was overcrowded yet eerily quiet, and it smelled of disinfectant, bandages, and blood. This ride out of Belgium was far different from the one just 4 short months earlier. He avoided looking at the window. He could not bear to see his reflection. Not anymore. His time at the front had been brief, at least when compared to other German soldiers, and it had started ominously. Werner had forgotten to inform the guards outside his car that Wilhelm was to be his guest. As a result, Wilhelm had been forced to squeeze into a crowded boxcar with 100 other men. It was tight, standing room only, and it smelled of sweat and fear. Being a captain afforded him comforts the lower ranks could only dream of. His quarters were a makeshift timber hut set back from the line, dry and reasonably warm when the stove was lit. He slept on a cot rather than in the mud, with a wool blanket and a small oil lamp on the crate that served as his table. A battered writing tablet and a few envelopes lay beside it, the pages often used for letters he never finished. He had a servant, a young conscript from Hamburg who cleaned his boots, fetched his meals, and tried to keep his uniform presentable despite the damp. The food was plain but steady. Bread, tinned meat, sometimes even a bottle of wine from home. Compared to the men crouched in dugouts or sleeping under the guns, it was a comfortable existence, almost civilized. And yet, the sounds of war were never far away. Even in the comfort, the earth still shook. Each morning began the same way. Reports were delivered to his quarters by dawn. Casualty counts, ammunition requests, and notes from the night patrols. He would read them over a cup of black coffee while his servant polished his boots and laid out his tunic. Afterward, he made his rounds through the trench, speaking briefly with his lieutenants, checking the sentries and ensuring his men looked sharp. He took pride in their orderliness, in the clean lines of their rifles, and the precision of their salutes. To him, these small signs of discipline were proof that even here, amid the mud and wire, civilization endured. The distant thunder of guns was constant, but it had become little more than background noise. By afternoon, he would be back at his desk, pencil in hand, drafting reports or sketching positions on a mud-stained map, believing that his careful leadership would keep his company safe from the chaos beyond the parapet. Now he was going home, but in his mind was the day 6 weeks earlier when he had gone on his usual rounds and everything changed. He had found himself in a dugout carved into the wall of the trench. These rooms were common, places where his orders passed from lieutenants to enlisted men. There were 3 of them with him now. They were all gathered around the table, murmuring over a map when the first shells began to fall. The bombardment was loud and relentless. The earthen walls trembled with each impact, loose dirt sifting down from the roof. The lamp swayed on its hook, its flames stretching thin before settling again. Wilhelm crouched low behind the heavy oak table, instinct guiding him more than reason. Outside, men were screaming. He could hear boots thudding across the duckboards and the frantic clatter of rifles being loaded. Then a voice, close and desperate, cut through the noise. "They're coming!" The shelling stopped as suddenly as it had begun. In the silence that followed, he could hear only his own heartbeat. But he knew what was coming. A ground attack. He knew that the enemy often fired a relentless barrage of shells before going over the top and rushing through no man's land in an effort to overtake their position. Then came the gunfire, sharp and immediate, echoing through the trench from both directions. The attack had begun. "Advance!" he shouted over the table, his voice breaking through the din. The word barely carried, swallowed by the roar of gunfire and the thunder of shells further down the line. Outside the dugout, the order was taken up by others. He saw shapes rushing past the entrance, men climbing the ladders and spilling over the parapet into the smoke. Some fell before they had gone 10 paces. The others, he would never know what became of them. The 3 lieutenants had their backs to the walls of the dugout. They could not see directly outside from their vantage point. Then Wilhelm heard it. A dull clink, metal striking wood. He turned towards the sound and saw the grenade roll beneath the far end of the table. A Mills bomb. Some British grunt had made a perfect and lucky throw. The bomb exploded. The train shook as it cut through the countryside, and despite his best efforts, he caught a glimpse of his face in the window, his new reality. Bright red scars ran down his left cheek and across his forehead. His nose was bandaged where it had been sheared off by shrapnel. Around him were men far worse off, some missing limbs, others so pale and still they seemed halfway home already. He pitied them in a distant sort of way, but the thought that he was still whole brought a quiet sense of relief. He was scarred, yes, but he was alive. The marks would fade. People would see past them soon enough. His life would resume, and Elizabeth, his Elizabeth, would be waiting. He had survived the front. Surely the rest would come easily. Thinking back again, he remembered waking in a dusty barn that had been turned into a regimental aid post. The pain was excruciating. A doctor leaned over him for a moment, his face shadowed and his hands quick. Something sharp pricked his arm, probably morphine, and then the world faded again. When he woke next, he was lying in a wagon, staring up at the canvas that covered the back. The road was rough, each jolt sending pain through his body. He cried out without meaning to. This time, a young woman, a nurse, leaned over him. There was another prick in his arm, and the world faded yet again. He woke again. This time, the motion was smoother, steadier. The sound of wheels clattering against iron rails filled the air. He was on a train. His head throbbed and his mouth was dry, but through the window he saw the soft, rolling fields of the Rhine Valley. For a moment he thought he might be dreaming. He had seen this landscape before, years ago, from the same kind of train, on trips with the Count to Karlsruhe. He knew then where he was being taken. There was a military hospital there, in the old university quarter. He had visited it once when he was a boy when his uncle fell from a horse during maneuvers. His uncle had been a soldier and had died in that very hospital. The memory had been faint until now. It returned with cruel clarity. The smell of disinfectant, the echo of boots in long corridors. This time, the pain was less, even though the rattling of the train was almost as intense as the wagon. No nurse or doctor sedated him this time. When the train finally stopped, his bed was wheeled out of the railcar and into the hospital. Now, he was on his final journey. After 4 weeks of convalescence in the military hospital, it was time to go home. He had been informed that he was no longer a soldier, though the Kaiser had thanked him for his service and his sacrifice. Soon, he would see Breidenbach Manor again. The Count, his mother, the servants, and of course, Elizabeth. But first, he would have to keep his eyes from the window and countryside he so loved. For every glance returned an unfamiliar and ugly reflection, one that he despised. The train began to slow as it approached Rheinsberg, the small valley town that had always marked the beginning of home. Beyond its low station lay the vineyards that rolled down towards the river, the same vines his family had tended for generations. He pressed a hand to his abdomen as he stood and looked around the car at the other soldiers also going home. He wished them well. Then he stepped down gingerly from the car. Too much movement brought pain he could do without. He looked around the platform without knowing why. Perhaps it was instinct. He had sent no letter to his family nor to Elizabeth. He wanted to walk. It was only 3 miles. He looked down at himself. His uniform was no longer neatly pressed. It was not dirty or torn, only no longer new. He lifted his chin and straightened his posture, pride stiffening what pain had bent, and began the walk toward home. Breidenbach Manor stood atop a hill overlooking 4 vast vineyards, all of which were currently sitting bare in the mid-December winter. The manor itself was surrounded by a 6-foot-tall wrought iron fence with a small guardhouse near the gate. The 3-story manor's brick facade with its 3 chimneys, all releasing thin wisps of smoke, stood in stark contrast to the gray sky. He took a deep breath as he approached the gate. The man in the guardhouse looked up from the book he was reading. "Yes, sir. Just visiting?" His breath caught as he realized who was standing before him. Baron von Breidenbach? The man, Sigmund, had worked for the family for a number of years now. He had watched Wilhelm grow. "Hello, Sigmund." Sigmund got to his feet very quickly and ran out of the guardhouse to open the gate. He then embraced Wilhelm. "You're home!" He stepped back to look at him. "And all in one piece, I see." "More or less," Wilhelm returned. He didn't realize that he had instinctively rubbed the scar that ran across his forehead. Sigmund glanced down at the medium-sized kit bag Wilhelm carried. "Let me take that for you. Come, let's go to the house. Your parents will be thrilled," he said, his voice bright with excitement. "Lead the way," he replied. Leaving the guardhouse empty, something that Wilhelm's father wouldn't like, the two men made their way to the large mahogany front doors of the manor. The reunion with his parents had been everything he expected. His mother cried when she saw the bright red lines on his face, the scars, and the bandage that still covered what had once been his nose. The Count, however, was his ever stoic and pragmatic self. "Well, it doesn't look good, but it could have been a lot worse, son. Didn't you say that 3 other men died that day?" "Yes, sir, from the grenade. So we thank our lucky stars it was not 4. "I guess so," he had said. As the evening wore on, even through dinner, his mother asked questions about his experience at the front. The Count listened, but Wilhelm was used to that. The Count spoke only when he had something important to say. Now he lay in his room, a place he had not seen in months, staring up at the ceiling when the thought came to him. Their reunion had lasted long into night, and now with the fires extinguished and the servants dismissed, he realized that his mother had not mentioned Elizabeth, not once. The sound of curtains being thrown open woke him. He had forgotten about this routine in the house. Every morning at daybreak, a servant would enter his room and wake him with the rising sun. This time it was Lena, a young servant who had been with the family for only 2 years. She was neither slender nor pretty. His mother had long since learned not to hire those kind of girls. Lena turned and looked at him. Her hands flew to her mouth and she gasped before running from the room. He sat up in bed and looked at the mirror on the wall. "Yeah, I'd run too," he thought. After dressing, he walked downstairs for breakfast, where the kitchen had laid out a spread of fresh rolls, cold meats, soft-boiled eggs, and steaming coffee, all arranged with the same care and precision as if the war were a world away. "This is one thing I missed," he said as he sat down. His father looked up from the paper. "Breakfast? They don't have breakfast over there?" "I was at war, father, not on holiday in Spain." "Oh, that's right." The Count nodded absently and went back to his paper. "How did you sleep, dear?" his mother asked. "Not too bad," he said after a pause. "All things considered, it was nice to sleep in my own bed." "When does the—" She hesitated, gesturing faintly towards his face. "What?" he asked. "The bandage, when does it come off?" she finally asked. "I take it off all the time, Mother. I clean the wound and put another on." "But when do you have to stop wearing it?" "It's unsightly," his father added, still without looking up. "Well," Wilhelm said, his tone sharpening, "if you think the bandage is unsightly, wait until you see what's underneath." His father looked up at him. "That was insensitive on my part. I apologize." "No need, father. I understand." He reached for a soft-boiled egg and a roll. They sat in silence for a while, each of them picking at the spread before them. Slowly, it disappeared. "I think I will go see Elizabeth today," Wilhelm pronounced. "That reminds me," his mother started. "We have not seen her since you left." "Since the engagement party?" he asked. "That's right. I would have thought she would come by to ask about you, but she has not." "Well, it's no matter. I'll go see her later today." The air was colder than the day before as he followed the path that led to Falkenberg Manor. Unlike his own, it did not sit on a hill, nor was it enclosed by iron fencing, but it was every bit as grand. He was nervous. Why, though? This was his fiancée, the woman who would love him through sickness and health. She was going to promise that. She had already promised that. He stood in the foyer, his gloved hands clasped behind his back as he looked out the tall window towards the vineyard. The mid-morning light made the frost shimmer on the vines, and for a moment he let himself believe that everything was as it had been before. Behind him, the sound of hurried footsteps broke the stillness. "Wilhelm!" Her voice filled the hall, bright, eager, familiar. He turned slightly as she descended the staircase, her smile wide, her eyes shining. "You're home," she said, nearly breathless. "You have no idea how happy this makes me, my love. I thought you would be gone for years, not months. What a surprise!" He turned fully towards her. The words died in her throat. Her face froze. Her smile faltered, and what replaced it was not pity. It was fear. She stepped back, her hand rising to her mouth. "Elizabeth," he said softly, taking a step closer. "It's me." She shook her head, and he could see the tears already welling in her eyes. He reached out to hold her. "No," she said, holding her arms out to keep him at bay. "I can't." "Why?" he asked, confused. She wiped her eyes and scoffed. "Why?" She paused. "You know why." He felt a tear in his eye now. "I'm a little mangled, but I'm still me." "Get out," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, just go." He stared at her, confusion flooding through him. "But we should discuss the wedding." Her expression hardened. The tears vanished, replaced by coldness. "Wedding?" she said bitterly. "You think that there will be a wedding?" "Why wouldn't there be a wedding? I asked, you agreed." "I agreed to marry the most handsome man in this valley, and I deserve that. I deserve handsome. What, do you think I can show up to the Kaiser's ball in Berlin with a freak?" The words cut deeper than the shrapnel ever had. "Now go," and she pointed towards the door. He stood there for a moment longer, watching her turn and walk slowly up the stairs. When she had disappeared behind a slamming door, he left. His father had been furious about the development. His mother had been sympathetic. While his mother tried to console him in his sadness, his father was already contemplating ending the business relationship with the Falkenbergs. Now, hours later, he sat in his room, the curtains still open, the sky outside getting darker by the minute. He thought over all that had happened. He had volunteered for the Kaiser's army. It had been his decision to go. His father could have kept him home, even if conscription had come. He had no reason to be on the front lines that day either. If he had stayed behind, there would have only been 3 casualties from that grenade. If only he had stayed home, stayed whole. There would be no servants frightened by his appearance, no pain, no scars. He would still have a nose, and he would still have Elizabeth. He glanced at his kit bag, which sat on a chair near the door. He stood and walked toward it. Unzipping the bag, he rummaged through it until he found what he was looking for. He sat on the bed, tears in his eyes, and put the pistol in his mouth. You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, where history comes alive through the lives of those who lived it. If this episode moved you, please share it, follow, and leave a rating. Help keep these stories alive. Want to hold these stories in your hand? Explore the books inspired by them, available now on Kindle and in paperback.